He'd never put out an ad for a cook. But there she stood on his porch, and he had a feeling that sending her back would be the worst mistake of his life. Wyoming Territory, in the fall of 1883, was a country that did not forgive softness. Out past the last bend of the Powder River, where the grass ran gold to the base of the bighorns and the wind never once stopped talking, Wade Rourke worked 400 acres alone, the way he had for 3 years since the fever took Ellen and the small, still bundle that would have been their son. He had learned to keep his life narrow. A narrow life had fewer doors for grief to come through. So when the wagon track brought a stranger up his lane in the last copper light of evening, Wade set down the harness he was mending and reached, without hurry, for the rifle by the barn door. She came on foot, leading no horse, carrying a carpetbag that had seen better roads. A woman, a young woman, grown, 5 and 20 by his guess, in a traveling dress the color of ash, and even from 40 yards Wade could see the way she favored her left side, the way she held one arm close, as though it had lately been taught to expect harm. When she stopped at the foot of his steps and lifted her face to him, the last of the light showed him the rest. A bruise had bloomed yellow-green along her jaw. Her lower lip had been split and had healed wrong. Someone had done that to her with a closed hand, and not long ago. "Mr. Rourke," she said. Her voice was steady. That steadiness cost her something. He could see the cost. "I've come about the position, the cook. I can start tonight if it suits." Wade Rourke had lived alone long enough to have grown honest, and honesty made a man a fair judge of lies. He had never placed an advertisement for a cook. He had never told a living soul he wanted one. There was no position, and they both knew there was no position. And he watched her stand there in the dying day and offer him the lie anyway, straight-backed, as if her whole life hung on whether he would agree to pretend along with her. He looked a long moment at the split lip and the arm held close. "Long way to come for supper work," he said. "It is," she agreed. She did not look away. "I'm a good cook. You won't be sorry for the meals." "Didn't figure to be." He set the rifle back inside the door where she could see it stay. "You got a name?" "Nora." A breath. "Nora is my name." It was not, he thought. But a name was hers to give, and he was not a man who took what was not offered. "Well, Nora." He came down 2 steps, slow, the way he would move toward a horse that had been whipped by its last owner. "I'll not stand here and tell you I put out any ad, because I didn't, and you'd know me for a liar. But it's coming on dark, and the nearest bed that isn't mine is 9 miles off, and I've got beans on the stove going to waste. You're welcome to the meal and the loft over the kitchen tonight. In the morning you can tell me the truth, or you can tell me nothing, and either way you'll not be sent off hungry into the dark. That's the whole of what I'm offering." He paused. "Staying's your choosing. So's leaving. I'll not put a hand to that door either way." Something moved in her face, not relief, not yet, something more careful than relief. She had come up his lane, the narrator would tell you, prepared to be turned away, prepared to be taken in for the wrong reasons, prepared for a great many things. She had not come prepared for a man to hand her the choice and mean it. "I'll stay," Nora said. "Thank you." "I'll earn it." "Beans don't need earning." Wade turned toward the house. "Come out of the cold." And that was how she came to the Rourke place. Not carried, not bought, not saved. She walked in on her own 2 feet, having chosen the door herself, and the wind pulled it shut behind her. The house was a long, low thing of pine and river stone, and Nora took it in the way a person takes in a room they mean to survive in. The exits, the corners, the heavy iron skillet hung within reach of the stove. Wade saw her do it and said nothing. He had seen that habit in beaten dogs and broke soldiers. A body learned to measure a room for danger the way it learned to breathe, and it did not unlearn it for the asking. He lit the lamp. The kitchen came up gold around them, and Nora stopped where she stood. It was a dead woman's kitchen, and it looked it. Everything was clean. Wade was not a slovenly man, but everything was untouched, kept the way a thing is kept when the keeping is all that is left. Dried bunches of sage hung from a nail, gone gray with 3 years' dust. A child's unfinished knit cap sat folded on the high shelf where a man would set it who could not bear to look at it and could not bear to put it away. And on that same shelf, front and center, stood a coffee pot of blue enamel, speckled white along the rim, the kind a bride carries west because her mother carried it before her. Nora looked at the sage and the little cap and the blue pot, and she understood the whole shape of him in one breath, the way women who have suffered can read the suffering of a room. "Your wife," she said, not a question. Ellen. It was the first time in a long while he had said the name aloud in that room, and it came out rougher than he meant. 3 years back. And the boy with her. He turned to the stove so she would not have to watch his face do what it did. "You'll cook on the near burners. The blue pot on the shelf, leave that be. That one's not for using." "I'll leave it be," she said quietly, and she did. They ate at a table built for a family, with the two of them at one end of it and the empty length of it stretching away into the dark like a road neither would name. She ate carefully, favoring the split lip, and he saw that too and pushed the softer bread toward her without a word. When the meal was done, she rose and washed the plates before he could tell her not to, and he stood in the doorway with his hat in his hands and told her the thing he needed her to hear. "I sleep in the barn," Wade said. "Warm enough this time of year. I'll sleep there while you're under this roof, every night, however many there are. That door's got a good bolt on the inside. You throw it, and there's not a soul on this earth can come through it, me included." He set his hat on. "I wanted you to know that before you climb those stairs. Sleep is a thing a body can't do while it's listening." She stood very still with a wet plate in her hands. "Why?" she said. "You don't know me. You don't know what I've done." "Don't need to know what you've done." Wade opened the door onto the cold and the enormous prairie dark. "I know what's been done to you. That's plenty for one night." He crossed to the barn and lay in the hay with his coat for a blanket. And up in the loft, after a while, he heard the small sound of a bolt being thrown. And then, a long while after that, he heard something he had not heard on his own land in 3 years. The sound of a person sleeping in the house. Breathing. Alive. The length of the dark between them and the whole world, held off by a good iron bolt and a man's given word. Morning found her already at the stove. She had risen before him, found the flour and the lard and the good skillet, and when Wade came in from the barn, stamping the cold out of his boots, there were biscuits rising golden in the oven, and eggs going in bacon fat, and coffee, made in the everyday tin pot, he noted, not the blue one, poured and waiting. It was the first cooked breakfast set in front of him by another hand since Ellen, and he had to stand a moment in the doorway and master himself before he could come to the table. He ate 3 biscuits and did not speak, because speaking would have said too much. "You weren't lying about the one thing," he said at last. "You can cook." "I can cook," Nora agreed. There was the ghost of something on her ruined mouth that might, in a kinder life, have been pride. "My mother kept a boarding house. I could feed 20 men before I was 12. A boarding house woman did not have the pale, unworked hands he had seen holding the wet plate the night before, the hands of a woman lately kept, not worked. But he let it lie. The truth of a person came out in its own season, and pushing at it only taught it to hide deeper. The days that followed built themselves into something Wade had no name for. She cooked and she cleaned the years of dust out of the dead kitchen so gently it was as if she were tending a grave. But she did more than cook. On the third day, she watched him struggle an hour with a heifer gone down with milk fever, then stepped past him without a by your leave, knelt in the muck in her ash-gray dress, and did a thing with a length of tubing and a steady hand that Wade had seen exactly one man do, a horse doctor down in Cheyenne, and the heifer was up and grazing by noon. "Boarding house," Wade said, watching her wipe her hands. "You'd be surprised what comes through a boarding house," said Nora, and would meet his eye no further. He began to notice her the way a man notices weather changing, the way she flinched still when he came around a corner she had not marked, flinched and then mastered it, furious at herself for the flinch, the way she never let her back face the door, the way when a stubborn gate slammed one afternoon she went white and still as a fence post. And he understood that somewhere in her life a slammed thing had always come just before a struck thing, and he made a private vow standing there to shut every door on his place soft as a whisper for as long as she lived on it. There was an evening she came down off the porch step in the blue dusk, and her boot caught, and Wade's hand was there before he had decided to move it, not around her, not pulling, just open and offered, a flat, steady palm under her reaching hand. She caught it. Their fingers held one instant longer than the catching required. Then she was steady, and she let go, and neither of them said a word about the warmth that had passed between two people who had each learned to expect only cold. He gave her Ellen's old winter shawl off the peg without ceremony, laid folded on the bench by her door one frosted morning, and did not stay to see her find it. That was the way of things between them, objects given without speech, the air doing the work the words could not. It was on the 9th night that Wade learned who he was truly sheltering. A prairie storm had come down off the mountains, and the lightning walked the ridgeline, and by its white flash, Wade, crossing from the barn to check the shutters, saw Nora standing in the open door of the house with his own spare rifle in her hands. She held it the way no boarding-house cook holds a rifle, stock seated true in the hollow of her shoulder, barrel steady, thumb already on the hammer, her whole body going quiet and exact. She was watching the storm-dark lane for something she plainly expected to come up it one day, and when the lightning showed her Wade instead, she did not fumble the gun. She lowered it, careful, and eased the hammer down with a click he heard between the thunder. "You handle that like a woman who's had cause," Wade said, coming up onto the porch, rain running off his hat. "I've had cause." She would not lower her eyes. The bruise on her jaw had faded to nothing by then, but the storm light found the older thing behind her face, the thing no fading would carry off. "A man taught me to be afraid in my own house, Mr. Rourke. I decided I would rather be afraid with a rifle in my hands than without one. That's all the truth I've got to give you tonight." Wade looked at her a long moment, the rain loud on the roof. "That's not the truth of a victim," he said. "That's the truth of a fighter." He took his wet hat off. "Get some sleep, Nora. Storm will pass. They mostly do." But he lay awake in the barn long after, turning over the picture of her in the doorway. A woman who had run, yes, but a woman who had run armed, waiting with a level barrel for the day her past came up the lane. He had taken her for something broken. He saw now he had taken her wrong. She was not broken. She was reloading. Before the world came knocking at the rancher's gate, and it would soon enough, there was one more quiet morning, frost on the corral rails and the smell of coffee and cut wood, the two of them working easy in the same silence for the first time without either measuring it. If you have stayed with this story so far, stay a little longer. What happens next is the part that changes everything. And if tales of love that outlast the hardest country the West could offer are the kind that keep you company, the small bell beneath this story is how we go on meeting like this. The world came up the lane on a Tuesday, riding a good horse and wearing a good coat, and it wore the face of a handsome man. Wade was at the corral when the rider came, and he watched Nora, 30 feet off at the wash line, go rigid the instant she marked the horse. The sheet dropped from her hands into the dirt. She did not run. She stood, and she set her feet, and Wade understood before the man had said a word that the lane had finally delivered the thing she had been waiting on with a rifle. "Afternoon," the man called, easy, reining up. He was perhaps 40, clean-shaven, prosperous, the kind of man towns elect to things. His eyes went past Wade to the woman by the wash line and warmed with a proprietor's warmth. "Well, there you are, Ruth. You've led me a chase." Ruth. Wade filed the true name away without a flicker. "I've no quarrel with you, friend," the man went on, to Wade now, all reason. "Royce Dean of Custer County. That woman is my lawful wife. Married these 6 years before God and the county clerk, and she has run off from my house and my bed, and I've come to fetch her home. The law's plain on it, and so's Scripture. A husband's owed his wife." He smiled, and it was a good smile, a smile that had won him a great deal. "I thank you for feeding her. I'll take her off your hands now." And here was the moment the whole thing turned, for everything the man said was true, and that was the horror of it. In Wyoming Territory in 1883, a runaway wife had no more standing than a strayed heifer, and any judge would sign her back into that good-coated man's keeping and call it order restored. Royce Dean had ridden up with the whole weight of the law and the church and the age behind him, and he had only to hold out his hand. He nearly had her. Wade could see Ruth swaying at the wash line under the sheer weight of it. 3 years of running about to come to nothing because a paper in a courthouse said this man could close his hand. Wade Rourke stepped between the wash line and the horse. "You're mistaken," Wade said. Royce Dean's smile held. "I don't believe I am." "You are. That woman's my cook. Hired her out of Cheyenne, papers and wages, a month back. Her name's Nora, and she's got no husband, because she told me plain she's a widow, and I've no cause to doubt a woman who's never once lied to me." Wade let that sit. "You'll not stand on my land and call my cook a runaway, and you'll not lay a hand toward her while I'm drawing breath. Get back on that good horse and ride off, now." The two men looked at each other, and the prairie wind came between them, and something passed in it that had nothing to do with law. "You're lying," Royce said softly. The smile was gone. "You know exactly who she is." "Then fetch the sheriff and prove it," Wade said, "because my word's as good as yours in this county, and better. And I've a rifle in the house says my cook stays put till a lawman with a paper says otherwise. Second time I'll say it, and I don't care to say things 3 times. Royce Dean sat his horse a long moment, taking the measure of the rifle he could not see and knew was there. Then he gathered his reins. "I'll be back with the law," he said, "and a paper. And when I am, rancher, I'll see what it costs a man in this territory to hide another man's wife." He wheeled the horse. "You've bought yourself a great deal of trouble over a woman who isn't yours." "Maybe," Wade said. "Ride on." He rode on, and Wade did not turn around, because he could hear behind him the sound of Ruth breathing like a woman who had gone under water and come up again, and he thought she might want a moment to have her face to herself. That night she did not go up to the loft. She sat at the long table by the low fire, and when Wade came in from seeing to the horses, she was mending his second shirt, the one with the shoulder gone through, that he had meant to throw out, mending it in small, fierce stitches, because it was the only way she had to say the thing she could not say. He sat across from her. For a long while the fire spoke, and they did not. "You lied for me," Ruth said finally, not looking up from the needle. "To his face. You could hang trouble on yourself for that, hiding a man's wife." "I know what I did." "Why?" And Wade Rourke, who talked to horses more than to people, found the words came easier than he feared. "Because 3 years ago I dug 2 graves under the cottonwood down at the river bend," he said, "and I put my whole life in them. And I've been living up here ever since like a man minding a house he doesn't live in anymore. I stopped expecting anything from anybody." He turned his hat in his hands. "And then a woman walked up my lane telling a lie so brave it near broke my heart, and asked me to pretend along with her. And for the first time since I filled in that second grave, I wanted something. I wanted the morning to come so I could see would she still be there. That's the why." He looked up. "You want to tell me the rest, Ruth? I'll hear it. And if you don't, you're still my cook, and that man's still wrong, and nothing about tomorrow changes." She was quiet. Then she set the needle down. "Nora was my sister," she said. "She died of the diphtheria when we were girls. I took her name because I couldn't bear to run under my own. Ruth is the name he calls, you understand, and I didn't want to answer to it ever again." Her hands lay still in her lap, and the firelight moved on the old kitchen and the blue pot high on its shelf. "I married Royce Dean at 19. Everyone in Custer County thought me the luckiest girl alive. Fine house, good coat like you saw. And behind the door of that fine house, he taught me what his fists thought of a wife who spoke, or a wife who was silent. Because it was never about the thing I did. It was the doing of it, because he could." She breathed. 6 years. The last time, I thought he'd kill me, and I decided I would rather die on the road running than die on his floor waiting. So I ran, and I made up an ad that never was, because a woman alone gets one kind of welcome, and a hired cook gets another. She met his eyes. "You knew there was no ad from the first breath, and you let me keep my lie anyway. Do you know what that is, to a person called a liar every day for 6 years by the man who was the liar? You have no idea what you did." The fire popped. Wade rose and crossed the room and did the thing he had told her he would not do without her leave. He stopped an arm's length off, and he waited, and he let her be the one to close the last of the distance, if she would. She rose. She closed it. The kiss was brief, and it asked nothing and took nothing. And what broke open in Ruth in that moment was not desire, but its far rarer cousin, the plain astonishment of being held by hands that had never once been raised. She had forgotten a touch could mean only kindness. She stood in the ruin of everything Royce Dean had taught her and learned in the space of one breath that he had been wrong about the whole of it. "Ruth," Wade said when they parted, trying the true name out low, like a man testing ice. "Ruth, I like it better than the lie." "So do I," she said, wondering, "when you're the one saying it." Royce Dean came back with the law, as he had promised. He came back with worse. It was 5 nights later, past midnight, and he did not come alone, and he did not come with a paper. He came with a hired man and a can of coal oil, because a reasonable man had failed, and a reasonable man was not what Royce Dean truly was under the good coat. He was a man who owned things, and a thing that would not be owned was a thing he would rather burn than lose. Wade woke to the barn going up, the horses screaming. The whole night turned orange, and he ran out into it in his union suit with his rifle, and took a bullet through the side for his trouble before he ever saw the man who fired it. He went down to the yard between the burning barn and the house. The pain was a white astonishment. Through it he saw Royce Dean cross the firelit yard toward the house, calling her true name like a curse. And Wade could not rise, and this, the narrator will tell you plainly, was the moment the story could have ended, as so many like it truly ended, out on that hard ground, with a good man bleeding in the dirt, and a cruel man taking what the law let him take. But Royce Dean had made the same mistake Wade once made. He had taken Ruth for something broken. She came out of the house, not fleeing it, out of it, with Wade's spare rifle seated true in the hollow of her shoulder, the way the lightning had shown her 9 nights before. And her voice, when it came, was not raised and was not afraid, and was the more terrible for both. Royce. He turned. She was already sighted on him. You taught me to be afraid in my own house. You did not teach me to miss. The hired man moved at the edge of the firelight, and she put a round into the dirt a foot from his boots without ever taking her eyes off her husband. And the hired man decided his wages did not cover this, and went for his horse, and was gone. You will not touch him, Ruth said to Royce Dean. You will not touch me. You crossed the territory to burn a man's home over a woman who was never yours, and you will stand right there in the light where God and any witness can see you for once, instead of behind a good door. And witnesses there were, for the fire had been seen. The nearest neighbor and 2 of his hands came pounding up the lane on lathered horses, and behind them, drawn by the same orange glow, the county road brought others, and every one of them arrived to the same sight. The Rourke barn afire, Wade Rourke shot down in his own yard, and a fine-coated stranger standing at gunpoint before a steady-handed woman who was telling the plain truth of it in a voice that carried. Royce Dean, who had ruled 6 years by keeping his cruelty behind a door, found himself at last standing in the open light of it with no door anywhere, and no smile that would work, and the whole of Powder River country looking on and believing not him but her. They took Royce Dean and his coal oil to the sheriff, and the sheriff, a practical man, found the burning of a ranch and the shooting of its owner to be crimes the territory cared about a great deal, whatever the law thought of runaway wives. Royce Dean went east in irons to answer for arson and attempted murder, and the good coat did not save him. Ruth did not watch them take him. She was on her knees in the yard with her hands pressed to the hole in Wade Rourke's side, keeping the life in him by main force, and there she stayed. The fever took him for 3 days. She did not sleep through any of them. She packed the wound the way a woman knows who has patched worse in secret, and she brought it clean through the crisis, and on the 3rd night, when it broke at last and the sweat came and his eyes cleared, the first thing Wade Rourke saw was Ruth, asleep, sitting up in a chair beside him, with her hand still closed around his, keeping her watch, even in sleep, the way she had once kept it with a rifle in a doorway. He turned his hand over, careful not to wake her, so that his palm lay open under hers. Reloadin', he said softly, to no one, and something in the wrecked plane of him that had been shut 3 years came the rest of the way open, and stayed. By spring, the barn stood new raised, pine still pale and smelling of sap, because the neighbors who had come up the lane that burning night came back in daylight with hammers, the way frontier people did when they had finally decided whose side the truth was on. Wade healed slow and healed whole. The grass came back green to the foot of the bighorns, and the cottonwood down at the river bend leafed out over the 2 old graves, and under it, on a bright, still morning with the river running slow and no preacher for 40 miles, Wade Rourke and Ruth were married by their own word and the witness of 4 neighbors and one another, which out in that country was marriage enough and has held together longer unions than any paper ever did. She wore no wedding dress. She wore Ellen's winter shawl, given freely and worn freely, because there was room in a life, Ruth had learned, for grief and for the living both. And a heart was not a thing that ran out. That was the spring the blue enamel coffee pot came down off the shelf. Ruth did not ask him, and Wade did not announce it. She simply found it there one morning, at his place at the long table, scoured bright. 3 years of dust gone, full and steaming. Ellen's pot, the bride's pot, in use again at last in a kitchen that had a family in it once more. Wade poured her cup first. It was the whole of what he had to say, and she heard all of it, and the long table did not stretch away into the dark any more. A year on there was a child in Ellen's old cradle, a girl, and Wade Rourke, who had once dug his whole life into the ground beneath the cottonwood, walked the corral rails at dawn with his daughter against his shoulder and named for her the far mountains and the near river and the good pale barn. And behind him through the kitchen window came the sound of Ruth humming without words at a stove that was warm every morning, and the blue pot on the fire, and a bolt on a door that no one, anymore, had any cause to throw. If your heart has ever leaned toward a story where love arrived quiet and a lie told bravely on a cold porch and stayed long enough to change everything, then this story was for you. Out on the long grass of Wyoming, where the wind keeps the only memory of what was, the love between Wade Rourke and the woman the world had tried to break became the kind that does not need anyone to remember it to be real. He had let her keep her lie until she was strong enough to lay it down, which is perhaps the truest kindness one weathered soul can do for another. If stories of frontier love that endured through hardship, prejudice, and the kind of silence only the West knows speak to something in you, follow the lonesome trail for more. Here the love stories are quiet, the courage is real, and the last word is always worth the wait. Until the next trail.